The first message didn't make sense. I remember exactly how quiet it was that night. The kind of quiet that settles into your ears and makes everything feel a little farther away than it should. I was lying on my back, phone held above my face, just scrolling without really paying attention to anything. It was later than I usually stayed up, but I wasn't tired. My apartment felt normal, safe, like it always did. Nothing felt wrong until my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. It's just another notification, I thought. But something about the timing made me glance at it. Maybe it was the silence, or the fact that no one usually texted me that late. I tapped the screen and saw a message from a number I didn't recognize. "You left the door unlocked again." I stared at it for a few seconds, waiting for it to make sense. It didn't. My first thought was that it was meant for someone else. The wrong number, it happens. I almost laughed it off. But the word again stuck with me in a way I couldn't explain. It didn't feel random. It felt familiar. Like whoever sent it assumed I would understand. I sat up a little, shifting against the pillows, and looked toward my bedroom door. It was open, just like I always left it. Beyond it, the hallway was dark, leading toward the living room and the front door. I told myself not to be stupid. Still, I got out of bed. The floor felt colder than I expected as I stepped into the hallway. I didn't turn any lights on. I just walked slowly, listening to the soft creak of the floor beneath me, like it sounded louder now than it ever had before. When I reached the front door, I checked the lock. It was secure, exactly how I remembered leaving it. I stood there for a moment, hands still resting on the handle, trying to feel relieved, but I didn't. Not completely. I went back to my room and picked up my phone again. The message was still there, unchanged, like it was waiting for me to figure it out. I typed a quick reply. "Who is this?" I stared at the screen, watching the little empty space beneath my message. No typing dots, no response, just silence. I exhaled slowly and lay back down, trying to shake it off. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't. Then my phone buzzed again. I felt it before I even looked at it. That same quiet, almost deliberate vibration in the silence. Another message. Same number. "You should really check the other one." I read it twice, slower this time. My chest tightened in a way that didn't feel like panic yet, just something building underneath it. The other one. I only had one door. At least that's what I told myself. I glanced toward the hallway again, the darkness somehow deeper now, like it had shifted while I wasn't looking. My mind started going through everything: windows, balcony, even the bathroom, but none of it felt right. I stayed sitting on the edge of my bed, phone in my hand, trying to decide what to do. Ignore it, I thought. It's nothing. But I didn't move, because for some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about the way it said it. Not check your doors. The other one. After a long moment, I slowly stood up again. And this time, it didn't feel like I was just checking something. It felt like I was about to find out I wasn't alone. The apartment feels different now. I didn't rush this time. When I stepped out into the hallway again, I moved slower, like I was trying not to draw attention to myself. I wasn't even sure why. It was my apartment. It shouldn't have been anything to hide from. But the feeling had changed. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It was the kind of stillness that feels like it's waiting for something. Like the space itself was holding its breath. I stopped just outside my bedroom and listened. Nothing. No movement. No distant sounds from the street. Not even the faint hum I usually noticed from the refrigerator. It was like everything had been turned down just enough for me to notice what wasn't there. I forced myself to keep going. The front door was the first thing I checked again, even though I already knew it was locked. I pressed on the handle this time, harder than before, just to be sure. It didn't move. Solid. Secure. "See," I whispered under my breath, like saying it out loud might make it feel more real. Then I turned toward the living room. At first, everything looked the same. Couch, table, TV, nothing out of place. But as I stepped further in, something caught my eye. One of the dining chairs was pulled out slightly, not by much, just enough that it wasn't flush with the table anymore. I stood there for a second, trying to remember if I had left it like that. Maybe I had. It wasn't impossible. I didn't always push it back in perfectly. Still, I walked over and adjusted it, sliding it neatly into place. The sound of the legs scraping lightly against the floor felt louder than it should have. Waited, nothing reacted. I let out a slow breath and moved toward the kitchen. The light from the hallway barely reached inside, so I flicked the switch. The sudden brightness made me blink, and for a moment, everything looked normal again. Then I noticed one of the cabinet doors. It was slightly open, not wide, just enough to cast a thin shadow along the edge. I frowned and stepped closer. I had a habit of closing everything properly. It was one of those small things I did without thinking. Seeing it like that felt off. I reached out and pushed it shut. The click sounded sharp in the silence. As I stood there, I caught something else. A smell. Faint. Hard to place. Not strong enough to immediately recognize, but definitely not something I remembered being there before. It wasn't food, not exactly. Something dull and unfamiliar, like it had been lingering for a while. I inhaled again, trying to figure it out, but it faded just as quickly as I noticed it. I told myself it was nothing. Old air. Maybe something from earlier I hadn't paid attention to. But the more I moved through the apartment, the more those little things started to stack together. None of them meant anything on their own. A chair slightly out of place. A cabinet left open. Smell I couldn't identify. Together they felt like something I was supposed to notice. My phone buzzed again. I froze. For a moment I didn't even want to look at it. I already knew who it was. Slowly I pulled it out and read the message. You missed it. My stomach tightened. Missed what? I typed back immediately this time. Who is this? What do you want? I stared at the screen, waiting for the reply. Seconds passed, then more. Nothing. The silence felt heavier now, like it was pressing in from all sides. I became suddenly aware of how exposed I was, standing there in the middle of the apartment, holding my phone like it was the only thing connecting me to something outside of it. And then the thought came. What if they can see me right now? It's not in a clear way. It's not like someone standing in front of me. But in that subtle, impossible way that the messages seemed to know too much. I glanced around slowly, my eyes moving across the walls, the corners, the spaces between furniture. Nothing moved, nothing stood out. But the feeling didn't go away. It stayed there, quiet and steady, like something just out of sight. I didn't want to keep checking anymore, not because I was satisfied, but because I wasn't sure what I would do if I actually found something. So I walked back toward my bedroom, slower than before, trying not to make any sudden movements. The hallway felt longer now, darker, in a way I couldn't explain. When I stepped inside and turned slightly, I hesitated at the doorway. For a second, I considered closing it. Then I left it open, just like before, and sat back down on the edge of my bed. I looked out into the hallway, trying to decide if anything felt different. It did. I just couldn't tell if that was because something had changed, or because I had. It knows where I am. I sat there for a while, trying to slow my breathing, telling myself I was overthinking it. People get weird messages all the time. Wrong numbers, jokes that don't land, someone messing with you for no reason. It happens. That's what I kept repeating in my head. It's nothing. Just ignore it. I leaned back against the wall and pulled the blanket over my legs, trying to settle into the same position I had been in before all of this started. If I could just go back to that moment, maybe everything would feel normal again. My phone buzzed. The sound cut through the silence so sharply that I flinched without meaning to. I grabbed it immediately, like I didn't want it to make that noise again. Another message. Why did you stop checking? I didn't move. For a second I thought maybe I had read it wrong. But the words stayed the same, clear and direct. There was no guessing what it meant. They knew I had stopped. My chest tightened, and I felt my heartbeat start to pick up, faster than before, louder in my ears. I forced myself to stay still, keeping my posture the same, like nothing had changed. Like I hadn't just read something that made no sense. Slowly I lifted my eyes from the screen and looked around the room. Nothing looked different. Same walls. The same dim light from my phone reflecting off the ceiling. The same open doorway leading into the dark hallway. Everything was exactly how it should be. But it didn't feel that way anymore. I became aware of every small movement I made. The way my fingers shifted slightly on the phone. The way my breathing changed when I tried to control it. It felt like every little thing was being noticed. I tried to think of a logical explanation. Maybe someone had access to my phone somehow. Maybe they could see what I was doing through it. It made some sense, at least at first. But that wouldn't explain how they knew where I was walking in the apartment. I glanced toward the window. Could someone be watching from outside? It didn't seem likely. I wasn't on the ground floor, and even if someone was out there, they wouldn't have a clear view into every part of my apartment. Not the hallway, the kitchen. Another thought came. Someone in the building, a neighbor maybe. Someone who could hear me moving around, guess where I was based on sound. But that didn't fit either. The messages were too precise, too immediate. There wasn't any delay, no guessing. It was like they were following me step by step. I felt a slow, creeping discomfort settle deeper in my chest. Before I could think too much about it, my phone buzzed again. I looked down. Don't look at the closet. I read it once. Then again, my eyes moved, almost automatically, toward the closet door across the room. It was closed, completely normal, just like it always was. I hadn't even thought about it before. That was the part that stuck with me. Out of everything in the apartment, everything I had already checked, the closet hadn't crossed my mind even once. It was just there, part of the room, something I didn't question. Till now. I shifted slightly on the bed, trying to act like I wasn't reacting, even though there was no one there to see it. At least that's what I told myself. Don't look at it. The message wasn't a suggestion. It felt more like a warning. Or maybe an instruction. And that made it worse, because now I couldn't stop thinking about it. I stared at the door, noticing details I had never paid attention to before. The way the handle caught a bit of light. The thin line of shadow at the bottom where it didn't quite meet the floor. The complete stillness of it. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Just a closet. Clothes, boxes, things I hadn't used in a while. There was no reason for it to matter. But the longer I looked at it, the more it felt like something I wasn't supposed to ignore. I tightened my grip on my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen like I was about to type something, even though I didn't know what I would say. My breathing slowed, but only because I was forcing it to. I didn't get up. I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the closet door, caught between the urge to open it, and the feeling that I really shouldn't. The closet wasn't the worst part. I stayed on the bed longer than I want to admit, staring at the closet like it might do something if I looked away. My mind kept circling the same thought over and over. Don't look at it. It should have been easy to ignore. It was just a message from a number I didn't recognize. There was no reason to listen to it. But the way it was written didn't feel random. It felt deliberate, like whoever sent it knew exactly how I would react. That's what made it hard to stay still, because now it wasn't just about the closet. It was about why I was being told not to check it. I shifted my feet onto the floor again, the cold surface grounding me for a second. I told myself I was just going to prove there was nothing there, that this whole thing was getting into my head more than it should. I stood up slowly, keeping my eyes on the door. Each step felt louder than it should have. Not just the sound, but the awareness of it. The way the floor responded under my weight, the slight movement in the air as I passed through it. It felt like I was announcing exactly where I was with every step. Halfway across the room, I paused. Nothing moved. No sound, no message. Just the same stillness that had been there all along. I took the last few steps quicker than I meant to, stopping right in front of the closet. Up close, it looked exactly the same as it always did. Plain, unremarkable, no sign that it mattered at all. My hand hovered near the handle. For a moment I hesitated. Then I grabbed it and pulled the door open in one quick motion. The sudden movement felt too loud, like it broke something in the silence. But inside, nothing, just clothes hanging in place. A pair of shoes near the bottom. A few boxes pushed toward the back. Everything exactly where I remembered leaving it. I stood there, staring, waiting for something to feel wrong. Didn't. A wave of relief hit me so suddenly that I almost laughed. It wasn't real. Whatever this was, it wasn't happening the way I thought it was. I had let a few messages get into my head. I let out a slow breath, my shoulders dropping slightly as the tension started to ease. Then my phone buzzed. The sound snapped me back instantly. I didn't want to look, but I already knew I would. I reached into my pocket and pulled it out, my eyes going straight to the screen. Told you not to. The relief disappeared just as quickly as it had come. I read the message again, slower this time, feeling something shift in the way I understood it. It wasn't trying to protect me from something in the closet. It was telling me not to open it, because I wasn't supposed to. A quiet, unsettling realization settled in. This wasn't just someone watching. They were directing me. Every message wasn't random. It was timed, placed exactly when it needed to be. First the doors, then the checking. Now the closet. They weren't reacting to me. They were leading me. I looked back into the closet, suddenly unsure of what I was even supposed to be looking for. Everything inside still seemed normal, but it didn't feel reassuring anymore. If anything, it felt like I had just followed instructions without realizing it. My phone buzzed again. I didn't move right away this time. I already felt like I knew I wasn't going to like whatever it said. Slowly, I raised the screen. You're focusing on the wrong places. The words sat there, simple and clear, but they carried something heavier than anything that had come before. Wrong places. My grip on the phone tightened slightly as my mind tried to catch up. If the closet wasn't it, then what was? I stepped back from it, my eyes moving slowly around the room again, but now everything looked different. Not just unfamiliar, but incomplete. Like I'd been looking at the surface of things without actually seeing them. Thought about everything I'd already checked. The front door, the kitchen, the living room, all the obvious places. All the places I was supposed to look, and suddenly, none of them felt important anymore. Because if I had been guided to check those things, then there had to be something else I hadn't even considered. Something I hadn't been told to look at. I stood there in the middle of my room, the silence pressing in again, heavier than before. And for the first time, I realized the problem wasn't what I had already seen. It was what I hadn't looked at yet. The sounds I ignored before I didn't move right away. Just stood there, trying to think, trying to understand what I hadn't looked at yet. But the longer I stood still, the more I started noticing something else. It wasn't what I could see, it was what I could hear. At first it was subtle. So subtle I almost dismissed it again, the same way I probably had before tonight. It came from somewhere above me, or maybe just beyond the ceiling. A soft, uneven sound, like weight shifting slowly where there shouldn't have been anything to carry it. I lifted my head slightly, listening more carefully this time. It stopped. I held my breath, waiting for it to happen again. Nothing. I told myself it was the building settling. Old structures make noise. It's normal. I'd heard things like that before, and never thought twice about it. But now it didn't feel the same. Now it felt like something I was supposed to notice. I took a slow step forward, my foot barely making a sound against the floor. That's when I heard it again. Not from above this time, from the wall. A faint, almost unnoticeable shifting sound, like something brushing against the inside of it. It wasn't loud enough to clearly identify, but it didn't sound mechanical. It wasn't pipes or air moving through vents. It sounded deliberate. I turned my head slightly, focusing on the direction of it. The wall beside me looked exactly the same as it always had. Smooth, still, nothing to suggest anything was happening behind it. But the sound had come from somewhere. I stepped closer, my movements slow and careful. Like I was trying not to disturb something I couldn't see. Silence. Complete and immediate. The absence of sound felt just as noticeable as the sound itself. I stood there for a few seconds, unsure of what I was waiting for, then slowly stepped back again. It's when my phone buzzed. I flinched, my heart jumping before I could stop it. I pulled it out, already knowing what I was about to read. "You hear that now, don't you?" I didn't reply. I couldn't, because that message didn't feel like a question. It felt like confirmation. Whatever this was, it knew exactly what I was hearing. And that meant the sounds weren't random. They weren't just part of the building. They were part of this. I stayed where I was for a moment longer, trying to steady myself, then began moving again. Slower this time, more controlled. I moved through the apartment like I was tracing something invisible, trying to connect the places where the sounds had come from. Every step felt calculated, like I was being watched more closely now. The silence stretched between each movement, thick and heavy, like it was waiting for me to do something wrong. Then a soft tapping. It came from somewhere behind me. I turned quickly, my eyes scanning the space I had just walked through. The living room, the edge of the hallway. Nothing moved. The tapping stopped the moment I turned. I stood there, frozen, listening harder than I ever had before. There it was again. Light, irregular, not rhythmic enough to be mechanical, not consistent enough to ignore. It didn't match anything I recognized. I took a step toward it. It stopped. I paused. Nothing. I took another step. Still nothing. It was like it only existed when I wasn't actively looking for it. Slow, uncomfortable realization began to form in the back of my mind. I stopped moving completely. Not just my feet. Everything. I held my breath, forcing myself to stay as still as possible, like I was testing something I didn't fully understand yet. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then a faint shift. Closer this time. So quiet, I almost questioned whether I had imagined it. But I hadn't, because the moment I moved, even slightly, it stopped again, instantly. Like it had been waiting for that exact moment. My chest tightened as I slowly exhaled, trying not to make any sudden movements. It wasn't just random noise. It wasn't the building. It wasn't something I could explain away anymore. It was responding. The sounds weren't happening around me. They were happening because of me. I stood there in the middle of my apartment, surrounded by silence that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt aware. And for the first time, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. Whatever was here wasn't just making noise. It was listening too. It knows my routine. I didn't want to move anymore. Not after realizing the sounds were reacting to me. Not after understanding that, whatever this was, it wasn't random. It wasn't just there. It was aware. I stood there longer than I should have, my body tense, my breathing shallow, like even that might be something it could pick up on. Then my phone buzzed again. I closed my eyes for a second, before looking at it, like that might somehow change what I was about to see. It didn't. You always stay up this late. The message felt different from the others. Not urgent, not instructive, just observant. I stared at it, my mind trying to process what it meant. It wasn't guessing, it wasn't asking, it was stating something it already knew. Before I could even think of a response, another message came through. You checked the door twice tonight. My grip on the phone tightened. That was true. I hadn't even realized I'd done it twice until I read that. The first time when I got up after the message, the second when I went back to make sure. I felt something cold settle in my chest. There was no way for someone outside the apartment to know that. Not that precisely. Not in real time. Another vibration. You usually don't notice things this quickly. I didn't move. The words stayed on the screen, but they didn't feel like they were meant for me to read. They felt like they were meant for me to understand. My mind started racing, trying to hold on to something logical, something that made sense. But everything I came up with fell apart the second I thought about it for more than a few seconds. This wasn't someone watching me for the first time. This was someone who already knew me, not in a personal way, in a routine way. I slowly lowered the phone, my eyes drifting around the room again, but now it wasn't the space that felt wrong, it was the time. The realization didn't hit all at once. It came in pieces. Small, quiet memories that I had ignored before because they didn't seem important. Nights where I thought I heard something but told myself it was nothing. Moments where I woke up suddenly, without knowing why, just to find everything exactly the same as I left it. That feeling of something being slightly off, but not enough to question. I had brushed all of it aside, so there was never anything there to confirm it. Until now, I swallowed slowly, my throat dry, as I tried to go back through those moments more carefully. There had been times I stayed up late like this, scrolling on my phone, half aware of the silence around me. Times where I paused for no reason, like I was expecting to hear something. Times where I did hear something, but chose not to follow it. I always had an explanation. The building settling, neighbors moving around, my imagination, simple, easy answers that let me go back to feeling normal. But now, those explanations didn't feel solid anymore. They felt like excuses. My chest rose and fell a little faster as I looked down at my phone again, the messages still sitting there like they had been waiting for me to connect everything. This wasn't new. That was the part that made it worse. Whatever this was, it hadn't just appeared tonight, it had been here. For how long I didn't know. But long enough to learn my habits, long enough to know what I would ignore, long enough to know what I wouldn't question. I felt a slow, creeping realization settle deeper into my thoughts, heavier than anything that had come before. This wasn't the first time something had been in my apartment. It was just the first time I noticed it. I stayed still, barely breathing as that thought fully took shape. Because if it had been here before, if it had been watching, waiting, learning, then tonight wasn't random. Tonight wasn't a mistake. My fingers tightened slightly around the phone as I looked out into the dark hallway again, the silence no longer feeling empty. It felt intentional, like everything that had happened so far had been leading to this moment. And the more I thought about it, the more one idea kept pushing its way to the surface, something I didn't want to accept. Maybe tonight felt different, because it wanted me to notice. The one place I didn't check, I tried to slow everything down. Okay, the messages, the sounds, the thoughts, they were all moving too fast, piling on top of each other until I couldn't tell what mattered and what didn't. I needed something simple, something I could understand, so I forced myself to think logically. I went over everything I had already checked. The front door, locked. The kitchen, it's nothing out of place, at least nothing obvious. The living room, same as always, just slightly wrong in ways I couldn't explain. The closet, empty, or at least it looked empty. I stood there, replaying each step in my head, trying to find something I had missed, something that would make sense of all of this. And then it hit me. Not all at once. More like a quiet realization that slipped in between everything else. There was one place I hadn't checked. Not really. And my eyes moved slowly across the room until they landed on the bed. It felt almost stupid at first. Too simple. But the longer I thought about it, the harder it was to ignore. I hadn't looked under it. Not once. Even when I was checking everything else. Even when I was trying to convince myself there was nothing there. That space hadn't crossed my mind. And that didn't feel like an accident. It felt intentional. Delight. I had avoided it without realizing I was doing it. A faint tension built in my chest as I stared at the edge of the bed. At the dark space beneath it where the light didn't quite reach. It was just a shadow, that's all it was. It's a normal part of any room. But now it felt like something else. Something I hadn't been meant to think about. My phone buzzed. The sound felt closer this time, sharper, like it was right next to my ear. I didn't want to look. I already knew what it was going to say. Still, I pulled it out slowly, my hand not as steady as it had been before. One word, don't. I froze. The message sat there on the screen, simple and clear, but it carried more weight than anything else so far. Not a sentence, not an explanation, just a command. And it changed everything, because now it wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was about choice. I could ignore it. Stay where I was. Pretend that space under the bed didn't matter, or I could check. And risk confirming something I wasn't ready to see. My eyes moved back to the bed. The darkness underneath it felt deeper now, like it wasn't just the absence of light, but something thicker, something that didn't belong to the rest of the room. I swallowed, my throat dry, as my mind started running through both options. If I looked, I might find nothing. Just empty space. Dust. Maybe something I dropped and forgot about, and all of this would finally stop making sense. But if I didn't look, that thought felt worse, because then I would always know that I chose not to check, that something could be there right now, close enough to reach out from the dark if it wanted to. The fear shifted in a way I hadn't felt before. It wasn't about what I might discover. It was about what might already be there, waiting for me to decide. I stood there for a long time, doing nothing. The silence didn't break. The phone didn't buzz again. Even the faint sounds I had started noticing earlier were gone. It was like everything had paused, waiting. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself, but it didn't help. My body already felt like it had made the decision before I had. I stepped closer to the bed. Each movement felt heavier than it should have, like I was pushing through something I couldn't see. I stopped at the edge and looked down, my eyes trying to adjust to the darkness beneath it. I couldn't see anything clearly, just shadows. I hesitated one last time. Then slowly, I bent down. My knees touched the floor, the cold surface sending a sharp sensation through me that made everything feel more real. My hands rested lightly against the edge of the mattress as I leaned forward, just enough to bring myself closer to that space. I didn't look yet. I just stayed there, frozen in place, knowing that the next movement I made would change everything. I wish I hadn't looked. I stayed there for a second longer, kneeling on the floor, my hands resting against the edge of the mattress. My body felt locked in place, like it was waiting for permission to move. Then slowly, I leaned forward. I lowered my head just enough to see into the space beneath the bed. At first, nothing, just darkness. My eyes struggled to adjust, picking up faint outlines where the light from the room barely reached underneath. I could make out the floor, a thin layer of dust near the edges, the familiar shape of a box pushed toward the far side. It looked normal, exactly how it should. For a brief moment, I felt something close to relief. This was it. This was the thing I had been building up in my head, and it was nothing. I almost let out a breath. Then something shifted. It wasn't obvious, not something I could immediately point to. Just a slight change, like the way shadows move when your eyes try to focus too quickly. I froze. My breath caught halfway out of my chest as I stared harder into the darkness. There was something there. Not in a clear way, not something I could fully see, but something that didn't belong. A shape. Too still to be random, defined to be nothing. My mind tried to make sense of it, to fit it into something familiar. A bag, maybe. Something I had left there and forgotten about. But the longer I looked at it, the less that made sense, because it wasn't just sitting there. It felt like it was there. Present. Close. I leaned a fraction closer without meaning to, trying to see more clearly, to confirm what I was looking at. That's when it moved. Barely. Just enough that I couldn't pretend I imagined it. Subtle shift, like something adjusting itself after being still for too long. My entire body reacted before my mind could catch up. I pulled back instantly, my hands pressing harder against the mattress as I pushed myself away from the bed. My heart slammed against my chest, loud and uneven, like it was trying to break the silence I had been so careful to keep. I didn't make a sound. I forced myself not to. Even as the panic started to rise, even as every instinct told me to get away, to move, to do something, I stayed quiet. Because something was under my bed? Something that wasn't supposed to be there? Something that had just moved? I sat back on the floor, my breathing shallow now, controlled in short, careful pulls so it wouldn't carry too far. My eyes stayed locked on the edge of the bed, like I expected something to follow me out from under it at any moment. Nothing did. The room stayed still. But it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied. My phone buzzed. The sound made my chest tighten, but I didn't look at it right away. I already knew what it meant. Slowly I reached for it, my hand slightly shaking as I brought the screen into view. "You weren't supposed to see me like that." I stared at the message, the words sinking in slowly, heavier than anything that had come before. Not supposed to. Like I had broken something. Like I had stepped outside of whatever this was meant to be. My grip tightened around the phone as I felt the realization settle in. This wasn't just someone watching from a distance. It wasn't just messages and sounds and things I could almost explain. It was here, it's in the room. Close enough to hide beneath my bed. It's close enough to react when I looked at it. And now, it knew that I had seen it. I stayed where I was, frozen between moving and staying still. My eyes fixed on that same dark space, my mind struggling to keep up with what I had just confirmed. Because whatever was under there was aware. And now, it wasn't just watching me anymore. It knew I was watching it too. The final message, I didn't know what to do with my hands. They felt useless, like they weren't connected to anything that could help me. One still held my phone, the other rested against the floor, fingers pressing into it like I needed something solid to keep me grounded. My heart wouldn't slow down. Every beat felt too loud, too obvious, like it was echoing through the room. Something was under my bed. I kept repeating that in my head, like saying it enough times would make it feel less real. It didn't. I thought about calling someone. The idea came up suddenly, like a reflex. Call for help. Make noise. Do something.
My thumb hovered over my phone, moving toward the screen.
Then it buzzed. I stopped instantly. Slowly, I looked down. Don't make noise. The words felt heavier than anything before them. Not just a warning, a command. Something about it made my chest tighten in a way that felt different from fear, sharper, more immediate. Because now it wasn't just about what I had seen. It was about what would happen if I reacted the wrong way. I lowered my hand slightly, my thumb pulling away from the screen. The room felt smaller now. Not physically, but in a way that pressed in on me from every direction. The air felt thicker, harder to move through, like even breathing too deeply might carry further than I wanted it to. I forced myself to stay still, barely breathing. Every part of me felt focused on the same thing, listening, waiting. The silence stretched, longer than it should have. Long enough that I started to wonder if anything was going to happen at all. Maybe it wouldn't move. Maybe it was waiting for me to do something first. My eyes stayed locked on the edge of the bed, on the same dark space where I had seen it. Nothing changed. Nothing shifted. Then my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Slowly, carefully, I lifted it just enough to see the screen. I'm coming out now. Everything inside me went completely still, not just my body, my thoughts. It was like something had cut through everything at once, leaving nothing but that one sentence sitting there. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the edge of the bed, waiting for something to happen. Seconds passed, or maybe longer. It was hard to tell. Silence didn't break. There was no movement. No sound. Nothing. But that made it worse, because now I couldn't tell if it was already moving, or if it was waiting for the exact moment I stopped expecting it. My chest tightened as I held my breath without realizing it. Every part of me focused on that one spot, trying to catch even the smallest change. The space under the bed stayed dark, unmoving, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like something was about to happen. Something close. Something I wouldn't be able to stop. I stayed there, frozen in place, staring into that same darkness, listening for something that might already be there, and not knowing if the silence meant I was safe, or if it had already started. Closing reflection, I still don't know if it left. I don't remember exactly how long I stayed there. At some point, something shifted. Not in a way I could clearly explain. Not something I could point to and say that was the moment it changed. The tension broke just enough for me to move again. I didn't run. I didn't make any sudden movements. I just stood up slowly, like I was trying not to disturb anything, and walked out of the room without looking back. I left the apartment that night. Not immediately, not in a rush. It took time before I convinced myself it was safe enough to even reach the door. I don't remember unlocking it. I don't remember stepping outside. I just remember the feeling of being somewhere else, away from that room. I didn't go back alone after that. Even now, I can't bring myself to stay there by myself. Not after what I saw, not after what I understood. I tried once, weeks later, thinking maybe it had all been something I couldn't explain in the moment. I didn't make it through the night. Nothing happened that time. No messages, no sounds. Nothing that I could point to as a reason to leave, but that was the problem. The silence felt the same. Too complete, too aware. Like it was still there, just choosing not to do anything. I still get messages sometimes, not often, not every day. Just enough that I can't ignore them. Different numbers each time. No names, no explanations. They never say much. Short sentences. Sometimes just a few words. But every time I read them, I get the same feeling I did that night. It's like whoever is sending them isn't introducing themselves. They're continuing something. I stopped replying a long time ago. It didn't seem to make a difference. The messages never reacted to anything I said anyway. They just appeared when they wanted to, like they always had. I tried to make sense of it. To find something that explains what happened in a way that fits into something normal. But every explanation falls apart when I think about it for too long. Because it wasn't just the messages. It wasn't just the sounds. It was the way everything connected. The way it knew what I would ignore. The way it guided me to certain places while keeping me away from others. The way it reacted. That's the part I can't forget. It wasn't just there. It was aware of me, and I was aware of it. For a brief moment, in that space under my bed, those two things overlapped. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it wanted. And I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't looked. But that's not what stays with me. The part that never really leaves is something else. Something quieter. The thought that keeps coming back when I'm alone, especially at night, when everything is still and nothing feels quite right. The scariest part isn't what I saw. It's the possibility that it was there long before I noticed. That every sound I ignored, every feeling I brushed off, every moment that felt slightly off, but not enough to question, was never random. And sometimes when my phone buzzes late at night from a number I don't recognize, I don't even look at the message anymore, because I already know how it will feel. Familiar. Like something that never really ended. Like something that didn't leave. And maybe never will.